Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning to our non-East Coast friends. Welcome to the webinar, which is one of our series here with the ETAP. This one is recruiting high acuity clients. We will be talking about outreach strategies and special considerations for working with people experiencing homelessness. Move on to the next slide, please. So just to give you guys some high-level information, this webinar is being recorded. The saved recording will be available on the ETAP website. You can use your computer or telephone audio for this webinar. Do not call into the webinar if you're using your computer audio. That is what we have discovered makes that horrible, wretched noise that everyone then gets to hear. To minimize the background noise, all attendees have been muted. If you want to comment or you are experiencing technical difficulties, please use the chat box. Click the chat box on the bottom black bar of your Zoom screen and type away. And then if you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to ask it using the Q&A feature. Again, that little bottom black bar that you will see on your screen is your guide to getting information to and from us. So use the QA button to let us know that you have a question. Marina, is there anything else that I have forgotten to comment on?
No, I think that's what's awesome.
Awesome. So just as a way of introduction, my name is Jane Fox. I'm the co-PI of the Evaluation and Technical Assistance Provider, as you all know, ETAP. This project is housed at Boston University. And why are we here today? Well, as you know, this initiative is about HIV housing and employment. All of the sites have been funded to work with clients to maintain or engage them in HIV care, as well as provide services related to both housing and employment. The ETAP is funded to do two major things. One is to design and implement a multi-site, multi-method evaluation, of which I'm sure many of you have been on the evaluation calls as well. And the second piece that we've been charged with by HRSA is to provide technical assistance. And so many of you, if you've been on any of these before or you've been to the site visits, know that we have an entire panel of content experts that are working with us on this project, who are also helping us at both grantee meetings as well as on these webinars. So this webinar, as I said, is targeted really towards outreach strategies and those special considerations when you're working with people who are experiencing homelessness. Today we will be hearing from two fantastic content experts that we are so pleased to work with on a regular basis on these projects. The first is Patsy Foley. She is an outreach social worker from the Boston Healthcare for the Homeless program. And the second is James Apt, who is a medical case manager also with the Boston Healthcare for the Homeless program. So quickly, just to give you a guide of where we're going, the learning objectives for this webinar are as follows. We want to provide lessons learned from the linkage and retention intervention that is conducted at Boston Healthcare for the Homeless program. We want to talk about recruitment models and strategies for reaching those hard to reach clients that are experiencing homelessness. And then our two presenters will also share ideas and tips around safety regarding outreach and home visits. I know that that has been something that has come up with several discussions, both at the grantee meeting and on site visits. So I am going to turn this over to our speakers to start the fabulous content of this webinar.
Hi everyone, it's Patsy. I wanted to give you a little bit of background first on the Linkage and Retention program at Healthcare for the Homeless program. It's a program specifically for people who are living with HIV and AIDS, who are out of care and who we want to connect back to care. So I was the primary social worker on that grant for the last 4 years. And so it's been a really cool project that we've been working on to help some of our harder to reach clients get back into care. So when people are talking in the meetings about how they're having a hard time engaging some of our clients, I can often relate, and I really appreciate all the work that you guys are doing. So the ARCH program, we go by 2 different names, the Linkage and Retention program, and also recently the name was switched to the ARCH program, so I'll be using them both. And ARCH stands for Active Retention in Healthcare Services. So it was developed from the Spectrum study at Boston Medical Center. They were originally contacted by the state for a project that involved sending out like a line list every month for people who were either out of care for 6 months or more, meaning they hadn't received labs from their primary care provider in about 6 months or more, or who had a detectable viral load. So the study at BMC used a nurse and a peer navigator, and what they found was that oftentimes their peer navigators were doing a ton of case management services, and the nurses felt like they were being a little bit underutilized. So they recommended at the end of their study to switch the model to be a peer navigator and a social worker, which is the model that was funded at Boston Healthcare for the Homeless program and East Boston Neighborhood Health Center in 2014. So the program aims to be a 6-month outreach-based intervention for 20 of our highest acuity clients on the HIV team at Boston Healthcare for the Homeless program. The HIV team has approximately 350 patients. So we were working with a panel of about 20 patients for 6 months to see if we could increase their outcomes. So hopefully those outcomes being help them gain viral suppression or help them come into care in a more sustained way. So it was short-term intensive support for people with a detectable viral load, or short-term intensive support for people who were really having a hard time coming into care. And so through that program, we were working as hard as we could to address social and emotional barriers that were keeping people from care. So including homelessness, substance use disorder, criminal involvement, mental health disorders that were not being treated, and so much more is what we found. So our program was challenging to implement, and I wanted to bring that up because I know that so many of our SPINS projects have, are working really hard to get their programs off the ground, and so I just want to encourage you all to talk to us about issues that you might be having getting off the ground. We went through a lot of staffing changes for our agency to make our program work. In 2014, we hired a social worker, myself, and a peer navigator. We saw some challenges, so we didn't really have great support for our peer navigators is what we found, and we wanted to make sure that we were helping our staff feel supported. And so over time, we made a decision to move towards a medical case manager who we call the retention specialist due to funding. And even that person was having a hard time because these clients were so intensely high need. There was a challenge in finding the right fit for a role, a support person for the role. So then we tried for 2 full-time social workers and still had challenges bringing someone and keeping someone on board, again, because of the intensity of the outreach and intensity of some of our clients' needs. And then we made a decision as an agency that we should really focus more on integrating this model into our core program, our core team, which James asked us here from. We have 4 medical case managers, we have 3 RNs, and we have a countless amount of providers, medical providers. So we decided to integrate the Linkage and Retention team completely into our core team, which is our 3 nurses and our 4 medical case managers, and we would pair up in an interdisciplinary way to go out and do outreach and home visits. So a lot of changes. So I just wanted to talk quickly about sort of how it is that we identified our patients, and then how we used some surveillance data and systems of communications to do some care coordination for our clients. So every month we would get a what's called the line list sent from the Hinton State Lab, which is a Boston lab, and it would include about 30 patients who hadn't received their viral load in 6 months or more, where they received their last viral load lab, and then it would also include whose viral load came back as detectable. So it would give us that patient's name and date of birth, and then we were kind of left with this task of figuring out where that person was in their care. So our way of doing that is we have, once a week, our team has an integrated care team meeting, and we would bring up these patients who were out of care to our team of providers, behavioral health clinicians, case managers, and nurses. And we would try to see like who was the person who worked most closely with them and how could we get in touch with that person. We also used our electronic medical records to kind of do some digging around when their last appointment was, what the last note from the last person who may have worked with them was, like maybe this person moved out of the state and that's why they're not getting their labs done here anymore, or maybe that person was incarcerated and that's why they're not getting their labs anymore. Either way, we would do some digging and try and find out, and then at the end of that digging, we find out who was truly out of care and who we needed to develop an outreach model for and an outreach plan for. And then I'd work with the case managers and the nurses on staff to try and do either a home visit or do some general outreach to find that patient. Oftentimes our referrals came from Boston Medical Center. We would get a notification that one of our clients was inpatient and for an acute medical reason. And so we would go over, our office is located right across the street from Boston Medical Center. And so myself and a nurse or myself and a case manager would go over and meet with that person, that patient bedside and try to develop a plan on how we can be more supportive in helping them maintain their health goals. We also have Cortex, which is an encrypted texting system. So we would communicate with other providers. That was a provider-to-provider text messaging service. And then we'd also communicate, obviously, with other agencies if we knew that that person was maybe receiving their case management at a different agency or receiving housing services at a different agency. So we would send, obviously, emails and try and figure out where that person was last seen, or just send out a notice that we were looking for them and hoping to connect with them. And that's really how the main ways of our communication. So James and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what Acuity actually means. This presentation is for people for recruiting high acuity patients. So I'm not sure if we wanted to kind of backtrack and see if anyone actually knew what Acuity meant or if people were using Acuity tools in their agencies. There's a lot of different assessments that people use to determine what type of services people need. At Healthcare for the Homeless program, on our HIV team, we use the Acuity tool, which is a series of 14 categories that assess where people are in managing their healthcare, their personal relationships, their mental health status, substance use, housing, legal, support systems, relationships, income, transportation, and nutrition. And so we would just, it's a baseline to check in and see what are the areas that people need more support in. So on our team, we would do this assessment pretty much after intake, and then again in 3 months and in 6 months. And it was a way really to measure how the patient is doing, and also sort of a way to measure our own expectations, right? Like someone who has an intensive need in 5 or 6 different categories might be someone who you're going to work with for longer than 6 months. Might be someone who you're going to work with for a very long time, or might be someone who you need to check in with more frequently than someone who is scoring with some self-management or self-sufficiency. We wanted to, I think this is where we had a poll. I'm not sure. James, you had some notes on this slide that you wanted to bring out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with Acuity, so in terms of with the medical case managers, we actually do an abbreviated version of the Acuity score every time that we meet with a patient. We're Ryan White funded, and we've sort of built it into our EMR so that we can track changes. I think it's really important to note that any individual results of an Acuity tool won't mean as much as sort of trends over time. So I think with patients that you work with intensively, sort of looking over a period of weeks or months to see where the changes are occurring, I think it's really good because it helps you also know what outside providers, you might need to refer to, like other supports in the community. And also, I think it's worth noting there are certain patients where their baseline is always going to be high acuity. And I think a lot of it for us as patient navigators and case managers is to manage our own expectations about how much change is realistic with patients who have really, really complex backgrounds or really, really complex barriers to things like housing. Like there's, I think as sort of caregivers, we want to come in and sort of make these sweeping changes. But I think it's more important to really focus on what is realistic to consider in terms of change for a patient. And then obviously it always sort of reflect back the changes that are made for the better. I think sometimes patients go in and out of sort of being super high acuity to maybe slightly lower acuity, and they may not notice that. I think the case managers reflect back to the patients, and I think it's an important tool to reflect back the changes that have occurred and the successes that have happened. Because I think a lot of our patients who have sort of been trapped in the system for some period of time, I mean, they're used to sort of more bad news than good. So anything we can do to sort of support them and show that change is possible, even if it's small change. It's those small changes that accumulate and make for more sweeping changes over time.
And I think we've gotten a lot of questions at the ETAP about, when is the work done with our clients, right? So like, when can a client graduate from our services? And I think that when you're talking about people who are experiencing homelessness or people who may have complex histories of trauma or maybe are actively using substances or new to recovery or newly housed, I mean, these are all really intense life challenges that our peer navigators and case managers and support workers are, helping someone work through. I think that the short answer is the work is never done, right? We are constantly hoping to support our patients to live and lead more exciting lives, even if it's, maybe they achieve their housing goal. So one thing that James constantly says to our clients is like, what's your next housing goal? What else can we work on? How can we get you better housing? But I do think that this Acuity tool helps us measure some of the successes and some of the immediate needs. And so it might be a good way for agencies to look at how their clients are doing in a quick snapshot, right? So if you start working with someone who scores like a 35 and they're someone who has a lot of intense needs in a lot of different areas of their life, if you're able to address even 5 or 6 of these areas of functioning and help them move into some moderate need or basic need, it shows you that maybe you don't have to, maybe you can address the intensity at which you're working with the patient. So maybe they don't quite graduate from your services, but maybe they don't need intensive outreach, or maybe they don't need accompaniment to appointments anymore. They're eventually gradually moving into self-management. And so we're going to send out the Acuity tool that we use so that people can take a look at it and see if they want to implement any of that into their practices. Of course, we'd also be happy to see any tools that you guys are using at your agencies and offer feedback to see if there's something that we could help you guys, manage your case management loads and manage what your expectations are for the services that you're going to be providing.
And these different areas, these different domains that sort of address, a person's overall wellness, I mean, it really does model the holistic model of care that we practice, with mind and body being connected. All of these spheres are connected. They all impact one another. And when Patsy says, the work never ends, I have to tell you, even after you've stopped working with a patient, you're going to run into them at the gas station or in a public setting. Like, you'll see patients, I see patients that I've worked with for years, I just saw someone last week and I hadn't seen him in 8 years. He was doing great. I congratulated him. I think for our patients, it's really important for them to know that even though you're not seeing each other as often, that you're there as a support, or that the work that you did helps them get to the place that they're at.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, when we send out this actual acuity assessment that you guys will be able to take a deeper look into, there are some recommendations around what type of services you should be providing for someone who is a moderate need versus someone who's a basic need. And even with, we use this tool also to help people move out of the Linkage and Retention program, but then they move into intensive case management, which is means that they're still getting case management services, but the level of intensity is just dropping a bit. But they can still come in and get support for issues that arise in their life.
In a lot of cases, you know, the level of case management versus sort of what Patsy does, it's a difference between an A- and a B+.
So another question that we're going to move on from the acuity, but we're happy to obviously take questions at the end if people have specific questions about that. One of the questions that we continue to get is, how do we reach clients who don't have cell phones? So we wanted to take a quick poll to see what your agencies do in terms of contacting clients. We have, unfortunately, a policy against texting our clients or emailing or using social media at Healthcare for the Homeless program. So we have to do things a little old school. But I'm wondering at your agencies if people are able to use, if you're able to use social media in order to recruit, and what that looks like for you guys. So we're going to wait for the polls to come in for a few minutes.
Neck and neck.
So 50-50 so far. And they can see that. Sorry guys, my first webinar. So people are about 50-50. And I do wonder, like, what sites do you guys use when you're, did we answer a poll about that? So I'm wondering, like, what exactly is it that you guys are contacting people on?
This makes me wonder, I mean, I work with a lot of sort of older people who tend to, like myself, be a little technologically ignorant. It makes me wonder sort of whether our access to media is limited by the population that we serve. I mean, if I worked at a youth-based agency, I'm sure we'd be much more on the Facebook. Oh. Kind of.
So someone responding that they kind of use social media.
How do you kind of use social media?
What does kind of mean? So we wanted to talk a bit about what does that mean for HIPAA? You know, so when we talk about special considerations for people who are experiencing homelessness or who are accessing services for HIV care, we want to be very careful about the things that we're putting in email, text message, Facebook Messenger, and you know, I put Snapchat up there to be silly. I don't think that anyone is sending any Snapchats to people, but you never know. There is a chat aspect to that application. So we really just wanted to drive home, you know, to the message of maintaining someone's confidentiality and someone's privacy. So when you're sending text messages, how do we know that the text message is going to your actual patient? Funny side story here, I one time, even though we have a no texting, emailing, or media policy at our agency, I one time received a text message from a client in the community actually seeking drugs. And so that was a very uncomfortable situation. We had to bring the client into our agency and have a conversation with her about the message that we received. And, you know, she mentioned, I'm so sorry, I didn't send that message, but my partner had my phone and went through my whole contact list and asked any of them if they had any Klonopins or, and other benzos. And so just reiterating, like, you might be getting a text message from someone who's not actually that patient, or someone might have someone's email address. So, we are working with health information, and it's really important to protect that. So some recommendations would be, just to keep any health information very limited. Like, if you're going to reach out to someone, maybe saying, can you call me at this number so we can discuss your next appointment? And making sure that if you have a signature on your email, that it doesn't say HIV case manager from Family Health Center or HIV counselor and tester from Healthcare for the Homeless program. So we were also talking about some of the agencies that have received SPINS funding have been doing a really fantastic job at branding their name. So thinking about what your branding looks like and thinking about, does that indicate HIV services, and what does that mean for your clients? If you're going to hand them a card with something that says something about being HIV positive, then, really having that conversation with the client around keeping that in a safe place if they're concerned about their status being questioned or being learned. So at our agency, like I said, we do not allow for texting, emailing, and social media. The reason why we decided to do that is because some of our clients are wanting immediate responses from those messages, and there's no way to monitor when patients are sending them. So they might be sending us an email with an urgent message that they need assistance with immediately. So we have a paging system in our agency, and if a patient is going through a crisis or needing a refill or feeling like they need added support, it's a 24-hour paging system, and they can page a provider on call. And we explain this to our patients, up front, that in order to contact us, you can either reach us by cell phone or by office phone during these specific hours. And if it's outside of those hours, we make sure to let them know about our paging system. But that's about our clients contacting us. So how do we contact our clients who don't have a phone? One success story from the line list, we had a client who didn't have a cell phone, stayed at different shelters, sometimes doubled up with a family member in their basement, and he had missed several appointments, and he was a client who really loved music. And so he worked very closely with James. I was notified that he was out of care. I sent him a card that I had picked up. I think I got about 25 cards for $5 at CVS, and it had a little music note on it and said, just a note, just a little note. And on the inside, we wrote a personal message. Hey, client, we really miss you at the agency. We haven't seen you in a while. Give us a call. We'd like to talk about your next appointment. We want to help you schedule an appointment. If you get this in time, we scheduled you an appointment for this date at this time, and here are 2 bus passes and 2 train passes for you to get there. Lo and behold, the client actually received the letter, received the transportation, and that was exactly the issue for him not being able to come into care, was that he didn't have funds for transportation. He made it to his appointment. He was able to have his labs. He met with his primary care provider. He was prescribed medication. He met with James. He was able to work on some applications for housing. So just a simple way to help someone reconnect.
I think sometimes patients in the back of their minds, keep intending to come in, but maybe might need a little nudge just to do that. And a card just let them know that we're thinking about them and that their absence matters to us. And sometimes that's sort of what it takes for them to say, okay, I'm going to pick up the phone or borrow a friend's phone.
Mm-hmm. And so with that specific letter, we didn't include anything about healthcare for the homeless on the card. It was just a regular unmarked card with my name and our business address on it. So because he was staying with a family friend, we didn't want to include his personal health information, and we didn't include anything about what the appointment was for. We just said that it was a primary care appointment. So just certain ways that we get around being discreet about people's health information. We also have constantly during office hours at least one medical case manager in the office for people to check into. As I said, we're staffed with 4 medical case managers, which is incredible. But some of our case managers do outreach, so we're very careful about the way that we schedule when case managers can do outreach and when they need to be in the office, so that at least from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. we have someone available during office hours that someone could walk in and see a provider without an appointment. And in the mirror image of that, we also have dedicated outreach times and locations. So each of our 4 case managers have certain locations that they go to on a weekly basis at specific times. For example, James goes to one of the service agencies called the Boston Living Center in Boston, which is a service agency for people living with HIV, where they can get meals, they can get connected to support groups, they can see a case manager. They're a multi-service agency. And so he goes there every second Monday evening for dinner. He sits down and has dinner with people and does general outreach. Sometimes he's looking for a specific person, or sometimes he bumps into someone that he wasn't expecting to see and helps them get reconnected to care. And he also goes on the 4th Friday afternoon of every month. So patients can know that they can expect to see him at the Living Center, and they can approach him if it's something that they want to reconnect to for services, or he can approach them. Myself, when I'm doing outreach, I often go to I go all over the place. So I'll go to the transportation centers on a weekly basis. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the outreaches that I go to, but I'll go to places enough that people recognize me, and I will talk about what we bring to try and engage people once we see them. Another way to get in touch with people who don't have a cell phone is really communicating with their collateral contacts. So at our agency, we're a primary care provider, which means that we're not experts in housing, we're not experts in employment, but we do work with a lot of partner agencies that are experts in those fields. And so when we're meeting with a client, we're immediately asking them, who can I contact if I don't hear from you? I'll have them fill out a release. And then we develop a relationship with those collateral contacts. We often have emails floating about for patients who are challenging to engage in care to say, hey, your client came into our agency and they're concerned about their housing. Can you give us a housing update? Can I schedule a time for her to come and see you? So really trying to figure out how you can work with other agencies to build those relationships so that you can both agencies can do the best work for the clients. James, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I mean, I will say, it's really, I think referring a client or a patient to an outside resource involves a lot of preparation and involves a lot of sort of just, housing is a process, employment is a process, and sometimes a lot of our patients want instant results, and if that were possible, we'd do that. But I think a lot of it is sort of, again, moderating their expectations around, what they can expect, how long it would take, and sort of what the payoff is going to be. Because I think usually a little bit into it, most patients' enthusiasm wanes because applying for housing is just, it's a repetitive, monotonous process. But we house people that way. I mean, it actually works. So I think there's a lot of like little mini pep talks and interventions we do to say, like, I know this is horrible. I know your hand feels like it's going to fall off because you're just writing, but there is a payoff here. And to sort of just keep them focused on what the goal is, and to remind them that it can be done because we've done it with numerous other patients.
So at our agency, I can't advance the slide. So at our agency, we're really lucky in that we've developed strong relationships with different shelters in the city of Boston, and so we have clinics at multiple shelters in the city. So we have Healthcare for the Homeless program staff at Pine Street Inn, at St. Francis House, at Southampton Shelter, and many other locations across the city. And those are places where, one thing that's come up time and time again is that some of the SPINS grants, there's not a ton of intervention staff. So there, maybe you guys have 2 or 3 different staff that are working on direct care with patients. And so to pull 2 people out of the office to go and do outreach is pretty taxing on the staffing model, right? Like you're wanting to maintain safety, so we always recommend going out to do outreach in pairs. But where are the places that you could do outreach by yourself, theoretically? So when I was talking about how the different staffing models changed for my program through 2014 through 2017, one way that I had to get around it, because I didn't have necessarily a partner that I could go out into the community and do outreach with specifically, I would try to go to places that were public settings that I felt safe doing outreach independently. So those places included like inpatient hospitalization, where you could go and visit a client bedside, but there was also other staff around, so that if something emergent came up, we had other staff available to be supportive. So like I said, some of our shelter sites have clinics in them, so we could go into the clinic with the shelter and maybe meet with a client in that clinic space. If we ran into them in a day center, we could maybe say, do you mind checking in with me at the clinic? I have some updates, and I wanted to check in with you about some of your upcoming appointments. And what I'll say is, when you as a service provider go out of your way to meet a client in their community, most times they're really thankful for that, and really appreciative. And so it's a fantastic way to start to get to know your clients in their environment. If you go to visit someone who's inpatient at a hospital and you bring them a pair of socks, or, I'm really talking about how incredible James is here, but one time he made one of our clients a low sodium chicken salad from scratch. And she was so touched by that because she was really craving a chicken salad sandwich, and she was in the hospital, and the hospital didn't have great seasonings, and James cut up celery from his garden and brought it in. And I mean, like, that just meant the world to the patient, that one, he would come and visit her inpatient at the hospital, but 2, that he would bring her something that she was requesting. Sometimes we'll bring patients crossword puzzles, or we'll get donations for coloring books, or sometimes people will ask for toiletries because they don't like the toiletries that are available at the hospital. And so those little donations that are very low cost for our agency really speak to a need for the patients, and it says, like, we hear you and we know that this is uncomfortable, and we want to make it that much more comfortable for you. I think that there were some questions that we want to answer. No?
Yeah, folks just mentioned, Angela mentioned that they also use, like a free phone service.
Yes, thank you, Angela. Assurance or SafeLink, hopefully people, they both have websites, they have state-specific applications for people that have not applied for these. It's very easy. All you have to do is, provide proof that the person's attached to a benefit like Social Security or disability or food stamps, some public assistance, and send that in with the application. They get a little cranky about people sort of applying again and again, like losing their phones. But those are great resources. Thank you for sharing that with us, Angela, because being able to, it's always great. You know what? I hate talking by phone. Even this webinar is making me nervous because I just want to look into your eyes. Like I'm a visual person. But being able to call a patient when you can't go to visit them in person is huge. So if there's any way, and there are more and more companies that are sort of having these phones that there's no contract, it's pay month by month. They tend to be very low cost, at least in Boston, $30, $35. For a lot of our patients, their phone is kind of their lifeline, not just how they keep in touch with us, but family, friends, loved one, and other service providers. So in today's world, I think a phone is pretty essential.
We also, at our agency, allow our patients to use our address for a mailing address. So if people have housing applications that they're doing, we ask them to come in and check with the case manager, and also ask to check the mail for, weekly, so that if there's an update in their housing, they can come in and see us. Another resource around getting people phones is certain insurance companies will actually help patients get a phone. And in Massachusetts, we have the One Care project, and sometimes they will pay for a client to have a phone. So I think, when you can apply for a patient to have a phone, absolutely, that's incredible. It's so important. And when you can't, you have to be creative about how you're going to get connected with your clients.
I regularly let patients know that they can come in and use our phones to call family, friends, or loved ones just to check in. I say, leave in the room for 10 or 20 minutes, make some calls, get in touch with you if you need to. But also, I mean, there are more, there are a lot of clinical trials out there around adherence and other health issues that involve, like, people can get free phones or computers sometimes that way. The site that I go on is clinicaltrials.gov, because it's an online listing of all of the approved clinical trials currently operating in the world, and it has inclusion and exclusion criteria. And even if someone calls and they screen out of the study, they can ask to be referred to other studies that might suit them. The one thing we don't want is patients getting enrolled in studies where they're taking, phase 1 studies where they're taking some medication that is not FDA approved. But for things like access to exercise resources, nutrition, phones, adherence support, the clinical trials are actually kind of an interesting way to go.
There's a lot of clinical trials about smoking and reducing smoking, those types of things in Boston. That's been a big area of excitement for clients, because oftentimes they'll get a stipend or they'll get a gift card related to the trial.
Yeah.
No, just a comment saying that's brilliant, James, and these 2 phone services are totally free, and on the plus side, unlimited text.
Yeah, so that's something that we often face with our clients, is that they'll get unlimited text messaging with their plans, and then we'll get text messages about, can you check my mail? Did you see if my application came in? Or another thing, or do you have any benzos? But usually what we'll do is, we'll just call the client right back if there's a text message, and we'll just, reiterate. Unfortunately, we can't send text messages, even though our phones can receive them. But I'd be happy to talk in person. But sometimes our clients, when their minutes will run out, they'll send us a text message. And in short, it helps us to know, hey, our client is okay, and they're trying to reach out to us, which is a great thing. It's a way to continue building on the relationship.
And also, that's how we communicate in the modern world, is through text. More so, I think, than calling, because it's something people can do while riding the bus. Or, I don't think there's a person on this call, except maybe Sylvia, if she's there, who doesn't text throughout the day.
Mm-hmm. When thinking about what places you want to conduct outreach at your sites, I think one thing to consider is where do your patients go for their basic needs? So where are they going for their breakfast, lunch, and dinner? We've had some really great success at stopping in to see patients while they're getting a meal at St. Francis House, or getting a meal at one of our local shelters does a really nice breakfast. It's actually offsite from the shelter, but catching your clients when they're fed is a happy thing, right? Because that's one need that's off their mind in that moment. So if you could break bread with them and have a conversation about, I really wanted to meet with you to talk about what our plan is for your next goal, while you're having a cup of coffee with them, their likelihood of coming in and seeing you is that much better. Or being able to walk with them from that agency, or take a cab with them back to your agency, offering that type of support is really great. But think about where your clients are getting resources. In Boston, we have really, really cold winters and really, really hot summers. So oftentimes our street homeless population will go to places like the public library for air conditioning and water. So they'll spend a lot of time there. So just think about places that you can go by yourself and feel safe, and also where you might need to pair up with someone in your agency so that you can feel more comfortable doing outreach. We tend to do outreach on a scheduled basis, but also as needed. So we have programs that we visit when clients are going through crisis, or we might have a relationship with that program that might call us to say, your client is having a tough week. Can you come in and check in with your client, but also our staff, and try and develop a care plan to help them stay more supported. Where you're thinking about working with people who have high acuity, their street language and street behavior might not translate well to an inpatient or a residential treatment program. And so having the flexibility to be able to go and visit some of these places is a really awesome way to build a relationship with your clients. Another, thing that we do is we are very lucky in that we have a respite unit that's attached to our building. So we have a 110-bed respite facility, and we often can admit people to our respite care unit to restart their HIV medications. If they're having side effects of the medications, we can help kind of manage those side effects. We can also bring people into the respite facility and then refer them to further treatment. So it's a really cool opportunity to get people engaged and then to go up and meet with them and talk about their goals and try and, figure out what the next step will be for them. So, main point is think about the areas in your community that you'll be able to find patients and try and develop a plan around, should I be going with someone to this location, or is it something that I can do on my own?
And also in terms of outreach, outreach sounds like a very sort of lofty kind of thing. Sometimes outreach is walking around the block to find someone. I regularly throughout the week, there are patients we've been looking for that I will go out into the waiting room or around the block and I will find them. They're around, they just are not checking in or not there to see a nurse or case manager, and I happen to see them. Like if you think of it as being a series of like kind of concentric circles, outreach can be 100 feet away or it can be 10 miles away. You'd be surprised how much ground clients can cover and how close they can be. That's why these community, like the relationships in the community with other service providers and other case managers and other agencies really matter, because if another case manager lays eyes on someone and they know you're looking for them, they're going to contact you. So it's just those networks are really important.
So, and I think that one thing that comes up pretty consistently is how do you maintain confidentiality in these public settings, right? So say you do find your patient who's eating breakfast and enjoying themselves and maybe amongst their peers, and you walk in, case manager with a name tag that says Boston Healthcare for the Homeless Program, Patsy Foley, social worker. How do you manage confidentiality in that space? And so we wanted to talk a little bit about that, because some clients really don't like you coming into their space, right? They might really feel uncomfortable. Usually when we'll talk about this again in a few slides, but when I meet a client, one of the first things that I'll ask them is, I have an outreach role. I do a lot of my work in the community. Where are the places that it's okay for me to come and see you at? And where are the places that it's absolutely not okay for me to come and see you at? And most times your clients will tell you. There's a couple places in Boston that one of my clients, I remember her telling me, if you see me in that place, I'm working, and I don't want you approaching me. That's for your safety. It's for my safety. It's for my street credibility. If you see me in Eggleston Square, I'm probably going to be intoxicated, and I don't want you to approach me there. And so, okay, did I go through Eggleston Square sometimes? Yeah, but if I saw her, did I approach her? Absolutely not, because if I did, that would be breaking her respect. So some special considerations. Absolutely know your surroundings. If someone says that they hang out in a train station that you're not familiar with, make sure that you get familiar with that before you go to do outreach there. We had a home visit one time where one of our phlebotomists came with us because the client was having a hard time coming into the clinic to get her labs done. She had broken her hip and didn't want to get care for the hip at that time. So myself and a phlebotomist went to her apartment with her permission, and we drew some labs for her. But it was a really challenging space to do labs in. And so my coworker was actually on her hands and knees trying to help her get this lab work. It was our first time at that apartment. We didn't realize the cleanliness was pretty bad. And so my coworker had to go home and change her clothes. So it's like, you kind of want to know ahead of time, what are you walking into? And you won't always know what you're walking into, right? Like that's the beauty of life, is sometimes you have unexpected things come up. But, you know, especially when it comes to public settings, know your surroundings in the sense of, you know, is that an area that's high use for drug use? Is it an area that maybe you're not going to blend into racially? There are a couple different transportation sites that I would go to, and I would be I would look very different from the population that was at that train station. I'm a Caucasian female, and it was a predominantly African American neighborhood, and so some of my clients did not want me to approach them there, right? Because here's a young white girl, probably not someone who's just passing through, you know. So some of my clients would ask me not to visit from there. Some of my other clients would be like, absolutely, you can come and visit me here. And so I would visit those clients. The whole point of going to do outreach is, you know, to build trust with your patients. So listen to them. If they're saying that they hang out in certain areas, that they want you to come and bring resources to them, then try to make an effort to make a safe plan to visit them in those places. Don't do outreach just because you want to go get a cup of coffee and need a break. That's called a break. Really go with a purpose. If you're going to go and you want to visit someone, have a message to send them. Like if you're doing targeted outreach for a specific client, you know, bring the resources that you need. If you have something that they need to sign off on, or if you have an appointment card to remind them that they have an appointment coming up, you know, bring that with you so that you're not going out there and then just being like, you know, when a dog chases a squirrel and then catches the squirrel, it's like, what do I do with it, right? Like if you're out there looking for people and then you catch them and you meet them, what are you going to do in that moment? You know, make sure that you're using that time effectively. Really wanting to be discreet about personal information. So, you know, maybe not saying like, hey, you haven't come in for your HIV labs in a while. So we want to make sure that you can do that. You know, you want to just obviously use your common sense, but be discreet about what your purpose is there. And have a conversation with your supervisor about what you should be wearing on outreach. You know, when is it appropriate to wear maybe more comfortable clothing versus maybe something that you'd wear in the office. We at our agency love to get like personally embroidered sweaters, and like we have a street team that has rain jackets, and it has identification for Boston Healthcare for the Homeless program. Some of our clients really don't like to be approached when someone has something that says Boston Healthcare for the Homeless program on it. They don't want people to assume that they're homeless. They don't want people to know that they're homeless if they are homeless. So really think about who the person is that you're going to see in the community, and try to be dressed appropriately so that you're not making them feel uncomfortable. Because if you do, then the likelihood of you being able to do successful outreach for them in the future is pretty low. And then, you know, always make a follow-up plan for that person in that moment, right? Because you don't want to set an expectation that you're only going to do services in outreach settings, right? Like we have to set an expectation that this is a relationship where, yes, we can do some of the work in the community, but we also need for you to come in to the agency to do some of that work. So making a follow-up plan is really, really important. I have two funny stories about outreach, and then we can do a quick poll. But one time we had a client who was court involved. He was actively using cocaine and marijuana. He was having a lot of trouble in his housing, and he was going to be evicted from his housing. Didn't have a cell phone. The case management office at his housing location, we had left several messages for. He hadn't been into the clinic for months related to his HIV medication, so we also have a pharmacy at our agency. He hadn't picked up his meds in months. So we were really concerned that this person was you know, actively using, facing eviction, and not taking care of his health. We also didn't quite feel comfortable sending someone to do a home visit to his home without being able to inform him ahead of time that we were going to come over. And so this is a client where every single night when I would drive home from work, I would see on Blue Hill Avenue panhandling, which is a main street in Boston, and I'd see him every single night, usually off hours. Like because I lived in the neighborhood that he lived in, I would see him at 8:30 at night. Sometimes I'd see him on the weekends at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Sometimes I'd see him a little bit later. And so I let the team know. I said, hey, I see this client pretty frequently. Like, what do you guys think about me pulling over and chatting with him? And then most of the team said, absolutely not. Don't do that. And other people said, how could we figure out how to do this safely? So one night I was driving home around 8 o'clock, and it was really low traffic that day. And so I pulled over and I put my hazards on and I rolled my window down. Naturally, my client came running over, thought that I was going to be giving him money outside of my window. But I knew the client. I knew we had a relationship I had worked at the agency for 4 years. I knew that he was a safe person to approach in the community. And he rolled down his window and he said, "Oh, hey, lady, good to see you." And I said, hey, we're really worried about you. We want to be able to support you through some of your court appointments that are coming up. We've been trying to reach you. We haven't seen you. What do you think about coming in to see us? And he said, I'll come down there tomorrow morning. I said, okay, well, what do I do if you don't come down tomorrow morning? Like, do I just keep meeting you here on Blue Hill Avenue at 8 p.m. when I see you? Or like, I can't reach you? What's the backup plan here? And he said, if I don't come in tomorrow, no, he's like, I'm gonna come in tomorrow. Don't worry about it. And I said, well, listen, like, what if you don't come in? Would it be okay for me and another case manager to come to your house, ring your doorbell, and cab you into our agency? Like, we'll come over, we'll have a cab voucher, we can send you in by cab. And he said, if I don't come in by 11 a.m., you have my permission to come by my house and send me into the agency by cab. So 11 a.m. comes, 11 a.m. goes. Our client doesn't arrive. So myself and another case manager drove over to his apartment, rang his bell, and there he was. He was actually packing to come and see us. And so he was super thankful that we actually followed up on our follow-up plan. He came into our agency. He actually got admitted to our respite unit that day. He was restarted on his medications. Because he knew that there was an opportunity for him to go into the respite unit, he had packed a bag. So there was, he was preparing for this. And he got back on his medications, and then he got some support around his court court proceedings. We were able to say that this client was interested in getting further treatment, so his court proceedings went pretty well, and his housing was sustained because of it. So again, talking to your team about figuring out what's safe to do. Is that, what's within your comfort level? Do you feel comfortable doing something like that? And for some people, the answer is absolutely going to be no, and that's totally okay. But for some clients who you may know for many years, it might be perfectly okay to approach them outside of office hours. For this client, it worked out really well. Another lovely and much more brief story about one time James and I were doing outreach for another client who was very much out of care and off his meds, who had lost his housing and who was sleeping outside. He always told us that he panhandled at a specific CVS in a specific neighborhood, and that he loved it. It brought him so much joy. He actually was very well known to the community. He would talk to people about their family, about events happening in their lives, and he felt like it was his calling. Like he was bringing something to the community, to be out in front of that CVS and greet people and tell them to have a great day. And he was actually very good at it. So naturally, the first place that James and I went to look when we were looking for him was that CVS. And so we ran into him, and he said, "Hey guys, listen, like this is a really busy time for me, and I'm getting paid right now. Like, can you make this brief? Because I got stuff to do." So we had to make our interaction with him very brief. And at the end of it, he's like, "I'm starving. Can you guys get me some food? And then I'm panhandling for lunch. If you guys can buy me some food, I will sit with you and talk to you for a few minutes more about what's going on with me." So we went and got him some Chinese food. We sat down. made a plan for him to come into McGinnis to get restarted on his meds, and this man is now successfully housed after, you know, a long time of him being in our respite unit and reconnecting to housing applications and services and substance use programming. So, I mean, just some real opportunities here that if your clients allow you into their space, you can make some really great progress. So let's do a poll.
Oh, everyone loves them.
So you're talking with a client, it's a good and it's a productive conversation, and someone unfamiliar comes up to you and starts speaking to you, speaking with your client. What are some of the things that you could do?
I can't read.
A, you could interrupt and loudly introduce yourself as a patient navigator from the client's doctor's office. B, you could patiently stand by and follow the client's cues. C, you could quietly interlay with your eyes closed, softly chanting, "You can't see me, you can't see me," until you run away from the area. Or D, you could lie about who you are. So it seems like people unanimously agree that you patiently stand by and you follow the client's cues. So obviously, you know, we want to be cognizant of the fact that when you do outreach in clients' neighborhoods, they're gonna run into people that they know, and they're gonna approach clients. So like one time I was on the bus with a client, and a client that I had years ago started yelling at the whole bus, like, "That's my social worker, get up and let her fish out." And so it's like, you know, there's ways that you have to kind of be discreet about, you know, setting expectations and maybe having those conversations ahead of time.
I also just want to say, although B is sort of the leader in terms of the obvious, clear and obvious choice, there's a case to be made for D under certain circumstances. I think as long as you speak with your client ahead of time and come up with a plan. I mean, I usually ask patients, I say, so if we're talking in public and someone comes up, how do you want me to identify myself, or, you know, and in some cases they don't want me to say where I work, so I do lie, or I'll deflect. If someone asks me who they are, who I am, I'll get them talking about themselves. And then I'll sort of say, you can't see me, and run away. But I think under certain circumstances, a case can be made for D. I don't think any of these poll questions have one clear, like just one right answer.
So we're going to try and speed through some of the last slides so that we can have an opportunity for you guys to ask questions. So excuse me if I'm going a little bit too fast. But one thing that I brought up earlier is that when you're in some of these public settings and meeting clients for the first time, you're time limited, right? And you only have your client's attention, especially if they're in an inpatient hospitalization. They're not comfortable. They're not there on vacation. They're not feeling well, and they need to be resting. So I developed this, like, you know, I call it 3-question intake, and it's kind of a funny way to say, let me find out exactly what I need to know in this moment, and then I will follow up with you later so that I can allow for you to rest or do what it is that you need to be doing. And it's, you know, obviously first I'll let them know why I'm there, how I learned that they were inpatient so that they don't think that I'm stalking them, you know. So I'll let them know, hi, my name is Patsy Foley. I'm a social worker with Healthcare for the Homeless program. We have an intervention around helping people get better engaged in care, and I do a lot of outreach, and I was informed by, you know, James Apt, case manager at Healthcare for the Homeless, that you were inpatient. So I hope it's okay that I came to visit you. Is it okay that I came to visit you? They'll say, sure. And I'll say, I don't want to bother you because I know that you need to be resting, but if you have a few minutes, a couple things that I really want to ask, like, where do you spend, you know, if you're interested in this program and you want to be involved and you consent to wanting to be a participant in this program, then, you know, where do you spend your time during the day? Can I visit you there? And how can I get in touch with you? So sometimes our patients don't have cell phones. We know this, right? But maybe they have a best friend in the community who they feel totally comfortable with you calling. Or maybe their mom is someone they can contact, or their sister, or their daughter, or their case manager at a different agency, right? So, you know, these basic bare bone 3 questions: how am I going to get in touch with you when I leave this place? And are you okay with me getting in touch with you? So those are the questions, you know, that I start with, right? over time, when I build a relationship with them and they start to trust me, or when I start showing up with them at their breakfast where they said that they spend their day, and I start building some trust with them, I get more into the deeper questions. You know, are there issues around your substance use that you would like to address? You know, are you feeling ready to start addressing your HIV status? Are you feeling ready to start working on housing? Obviously, we get deeper into the questions later, but to start, I'm going to hit you with these 3 questions so that I can follow up with you in the community. And if they have a cell phone, that's awesome. Program it right into your phone so you can call them whenever you need to. So for some of our newer programs who are just starting their outreach, you know, we really want you to think about what do you already have access to in the community that can help you not have to reinvent the wheel. You all have been awarded this funding because you submitted an application, and in that application you talked about some of your community, you did a community needs assessment, right? So you talked about some of the things that you had access to, and you talked about your engagement in the community. So there are partners that you mentioned in your application that you either had intention of reaching out to or already had really great relationships with. And it's partially why you're awarded this money. So reach out to those community partners and see if any of them, you know, if you have a staff that is new to community outreach, try and talk to some of your partners and see if they have experience in outreach settings, and see if you could maybe partner with them. With staffing models being so short, you're going to have to do some interdisciplinary staff pairing. So in the program that I was working in, it was funded differently from the program that James was working in. James was on a team of 4 social workers. I was a 1-person team for a little bit there. So oftentimes I would pair up with James and we'd do home visits, and we'd visit, you know, 2 of his clients, and then in the afternoon, hopefully 1 or 2 of my clients. And we'd support each other through that, so that he didn't have to take out 2 of his case managers from the office all day. Think about what your clients need and what would be helpful for them. So one of the engagement tools that I used in my program, which was particularly about adherence to medication and addressing viral suppression, was medication deliveries. My clients who were newly housed, who had a fixed income and didn't have great transportation. Transportation in Boston is very expensive. It's $2 for the bus ride. You know, that gets pricey when you have to take a bus, a train, and another bus. That can be a $10 day for someone, round trip, or more. So thinking about, you know, once a month, hey, would it be okay if I came and did a medication delivery with you? And then on that home visit, can I assess how you did with your meds last month? I noticed that on Tuesdays, you keep missing your meds. What's that about? You might find out your client has a church group on Tuesday nights that they attend. And so when they get back from that appointment, they have, you know, they're exhausted and they go to bed. So then you can make a plan around, let's try to address why you're missing your meds on Tuesdays. I told you the funny story about how my coworker did lab work in the field for me. This was a client who had a broken hip, didn't want to come into the community, but, you know, doing a home visit where she was able to complete her labs felt good for her, right? So she hadn't had labs done in about a year. She actually was doing really well on her medications, and so we were able to follow up and say, hey, client, you actually have achieved the viral suppression. You're doing a great job with your medications. Thank you for letting us come to your home. Thank you for letting us do your labs. And that built rapport, and it helped her have some more confidence in her work, and her hard work in taking her meds. We use accompaniment at our agency. So outreach doesn't always have to be kind of hide and seek in the city that you're working in. It can also be accompaniment to Social Security office, to DTA, to court, doing things that help clients achieve their goals. Going to a housing agency and helping them fill out paperwork is a hugely important time. You know, it's a lot. You're spending a lot of time with the client, but you're achieving something in that time. Oftentimes, when I would accompany clients to Social Security or to the RMV to get a new ID, there'd be like 25 minutes where we'd be sitting waiting in line, and in that 25 minutes we would chat about the weather, the Red Sox, the Patriots, some of their hobbies, and that's when you really start building a relationship. It's like all that time that it takes to get to the agency, you're not just sitting there and checking your Facebook, you're talking to your client, you're building a relationship with them. And then, you know, I think the part that can be really challenging is really trying to make yourself available for unplanned outreach and accompaniment. So maybe a client comes in and has an appointment with their primary care provider and doesn't feel comfortable going to that visit. See if you can work with your team to see if you can step out of the office and go to that appointment with them so that you can advocate for your client about what their health needs are. We use incentives at our agency. Our incentives include transportation passes and a lot of food and coffee. James does an incredible job of finding donations. He works at Boomerang and he volunteers at Boomerangs, and sometimes our clients will say, like, I need a microwave, I need a coffee pot, I need a new TV, and by like the grace of this man, he'll find something that a client needs, and that helps the client A, get what they need, but 2, feel heard and feel like they really, you know, we're listening to them about what their needs are.
The sad truth is I'm a trash picker, so pairing my obsession with their need for things, my obsession with picking up stuff off the street, it works where it sort of is.
And it's affordable for us, right? Because like, we can't afford to buy patients new mattresses or coffee pots, but if we can get them in donations, then that goes a long way. We do food drives, we do sock drives. So our patients who are experiencing homelessness, who are walking around, wear out their socks pretty easily, and they have a lot of skin issues on their feet from walking about for so long. So whenever we do outreach, we always bring socks to give out to our clients. It's the least we can do.
And we have other things like vouchers for state ID. You know, to be able to say to a patient, I'll meet you at the R&B and I'll bring along a voucher. Another way to be supportive.
We're going to do a quick poll again. So I'll let James.
All right, poll number 2. And this happens to me on a regular basis. You're walking with a client and you're discussing some of the problems that have kept the client from connecting with care in the past. Come to an intersection where most people are stopped, waiting for the walk sign. The client keeps walking, narrowly avoiding traffic. Do you, A, follow them into traffic as a show of solidarity and to continue that discussion? B, stop at the crosswalk even though the patient is already crossing the street, and risk interrupting the conversation? C, go into the street and drag them back to the crosswalk, or good old-fashioned D, yell at them, yell at the patient. Oh, good. So last one was unanimous. This one we have some.
So we have 2 votes. Come on, guys.
Has anyone ever seen the traffic in Boston? People that are clicking A. Have you walked in Boston with this traffic? Worst drivers in the country. You are brave people. Don't change your answer. What? All right.
So this, we want everyone to do what's in their comfort level, right? Like if you don't, there have been times, of course, where I've run across the street with a client and it's uncomfortable and stupid. Right? Honestly, it's stupid. Don't run into traffic with your clients. But if you assess and you feel like that's okay, then that's your life choice. We're all about life choices here. But do it. Make an assessment in that moment and do what's best for your client, but also keep yourself safe. So last couple slides here, we just wanted to include some ideas for a packing list for outreach. When you're out in the community, obviously you don't have your office with you, so you need to think ahead about what you need to bring. Some things that we constantly bring, wearing comfortable clothing and shoes. Please bring a cell phone so that you can communicate with your team if you're having, one, so that you can communicate for your client. So if you get out there and do outreach and your client is there and you need to make a follow-up phone call to their probation officer, you can accomplish that in the community. But 2, like if something comes up, you're going to need to call your team and let them know you need support out there. Obviously, weather appropriate clothing. There's been about 105 times where I've gone out in the rain without an umbrella, or I've gone out not expecting it to rain and then it's raining and I'm soaked. So think about check the weather, friends, and then dress appropriately. You want to bring incentives if you can. We always talk about, socks and toiletries. Those are things that are donated to our agency very often. So if you don't have donations, think about doing a donation drive so that you can have that. We just came back from a site visit in Houston. I'm going to shout them out. they have an incredible food pantry. If you're going on outreach and you know that someone needs, might need some food, maybe think about bringing something from your food pantry. In Boston, it gets really cold. We often have hot hands, those hand warmers. Those are easy. They're lightweight that you can carry and put in your book bag, and it's something that it's low cost. You could pass up to someone as an engagement method. And obviously transportation passes. We use taxi vouchers so that if there's someone who's really sick and needs to see a nurse or a provider, we can cab them right into our clinic and have them be seen on a walk-in basis. Think about if that's something that you think would be good for your client. We have a very serious opiate crisis in our nation, but also, on our four corners right outside of our clinic. So I often carry a sharps container so that if my client is actively using, I can offer them either to keep the sharps container on their person, they can just keep it so that they can have a safe place to put their used needles, and gloves. People do funny things. I've had several clients, despite the fact that I am a social worker, ask me to look at things or show me things without warning. You want to wear gloves when appropriate if you need to assess anything, or if you are a nurse and you can do that. I tend to not touch, but we do have cell phones, and sometimes we'll FaceTime in the community with a provider to say, like, hey, this person looks like they might have conjunctivitis. Could you put in a prescription for an antibiotic? But gloves is just a handy thing for you to have. Hand sanitizer, always have hand sanitizer on you. I had a funny experience one time where a client was eating something very messily, and at the end of the visit wanted to shake my hand, and I didn't want to be rude, so I shook their hand, but then I had some mustard all over my hand. So, like, when you're on outreach, you might not have a think, having hand sanitizer is good. Snacks that you can give out if possible. Our clients love food. And then obviously all of your relevant paperwork and a pen so that you can get what you need accomplished. So people can print this or they can think of their own packing list, but I'm a very forgetful person, so I like to just kind of like run through it really quickly and make sure I have everything that I need for the day before I go out. So some do's and don'ts for home visits. These are things that are, we should be wrapping up soon, but I want people to think about your home visits. So very quickly, the things that you absolutely want to do is get permission from your supervisor, but also from the client. Is it okay for me to visit you at your home? I have made the mistake of visiting a client at her home. She had given me permission historically, but in the time that I went to visit her, she was actively using, and she was very deeply offended that I came with a resident. One of our residents came to accompany me to the home visit, and the patient was deeply offended that I would bring a doctor to her house. So when I say get permission, you really want to think about asking your client, when is it okay for me to visit you at your house, and when is it absolutely not okay? This is a client I couldn't get in touch with. We were worried that she may have overdosed. We were doing a safety check, and she really did not like that. A couple months later, she said she appreciated it, but in that moment, it felt really uncomfortable. She was, really unhappy that I came to see her. Check your agency's policies about your home visits. Make sure that you're following your agency's protocols. If you don't have a protocol, think about creating a protocol for your agency. Have a clear purpose for the home visit. You don't want to do a home visit just because you really love that client and you want to hang out with them. We have to be productive, and our clients need to feel heard in our mission. Be mindful of the client's personal boundaries. Sometimes clients don't really want you to, if they're having company over when you go to visit, you need to just be aware that they might not really actually want to talk about their health status while they have company. So, offer to come back. Be mindful of cultural differences. I've gone to homes where it's, you absolutely have to take your shoes off. And so, make sure you're wearing matching socks, because there's nothing more embarrassing than going into someone's home and having like a hole in your sock, or just kind of funny examples of, you're in someone else's home, you need to respect their boundaries. have an exit plan. I've also been on home visits where there's been an active drug deal in the home while I've been there, and so having to get out of that home immediately and respectfully is important. Our clients are sometimes engaging in high-risk behavior, so be mindful of that. Communicate with your team about where you are so that if you don't come back to the office, they know where you were and they can check in with you, and bring in needed resources. Things you absolutely don't want to do very quickly, you know, don't do home visits by yourself. You don't want to make an assumption about safety because you never know. There could be a neighbor at that home that isn't someone that you want to be riding an elevator with by yourself, you know, so don't make assumptions about your safety. You know, always remember that you're a guest. Follow the client's requests about, you know, how you conduct your home visit. Some people might ask you to take your jacket off and stay a while. Some people might not appreciate having a hat on, so just follow their cues. Really try as much as you can not to take any food or drinks from clients. This is something that our clients often will offer with great intention, but setting the boundary that, you know, you're a provider and you don't want to be, you know, taking their food. And then never leave without making a concise plan about follow-up. You really want to make sure that they know why you were there, and they want to know what the next steps are. So make sure you make a follow-up plan. We have another poll.
Oh, it's a poll. Okay, we saved the best one for last. You're leaving work and encounter a patient who has missed several appointments with you. This client appears to be purchasing an unknown substance from another person. Do you, the answer is A, do you approach the client and say, hey, let's party, got enough for me? B, ignore the client altogether and decline to mention it during your next meeting? C, attempt to make eye contact with the client to determine whether he or she is receptive to a quick meeting after the transaction is complete, or scrutinize the patient about it during your next meeting, like really stick it to them, grill them. I love this technology. We're getting good, even better cross-representation than before.
So I think, you know, obviously you want to check what is your relationship with that patient. You know, is it someone who you feel comfortable being direct with and saying, hey, you know, I saw you last night make that transaction. Can we check in about that? What's going on? Did you relapse? Is this how you're making your money? Or is it someone that you're just building a relationship with and maybe it's not the right time to discuss that yet? And you really have to kind of check your instincts on what the best way to approach is. Always keeping in mind your safety and the safety and dignity of your clients. So just to wrap up, some of the success stories that we had at Healthcare for the Homeless, the ARCH program, we were able to, in the 4 years, enroll and serve 59 clients. Some of our really, unfortunately, very sick clients did pass. We had about 9 clients pass, but we were able to do end-of-life care and support, funeral arrangements, assistance with their families. 11 of our clients were housed through a lot of our supportive referrals and community support. 27 of our patients achieved viral suppression. We were able to link a few of our patients to hepatitis C treatment. I'm not going to go into specifics because we're running out of time, but you know, some of the lessons learned, or as James says, failures, were just the challenges in program structure and thinking about. I know that for the SPINS project, this is a quick intervention, and most places are hiring new staff. So really thinking about how can you be supportive to your staff in learning the cultural norms of your agency and learning about resources and access to those things. Really thinking about implementing your project and are things working, checking in with your supervisor when things really are not working. Providing clinical supervision is so important to your staff members, and it will help with longevity in hiring. I mean, take it from me, I went through several coworkers who, at times this work was feeling too intense for them and they didn't have good support, and so, unfortunately they left. So thinking about what do people need to be successful. thinking about staffing models. Does it make sense at your agency for you guys to do interdisciplinary work? Do you guys want all of your roles to be the same, or do you want to differentiate those roles? On our team, it was hard. Clients really were confused when, like, James and I would come out and visit them, because I'm a social worker and he's a case manager. We do the same thing, you know. We're about the same thing. We just have maybe different training in how we achieve those goals. But you know, it's really awesome when we can have a nurse go out to a home visit with one of our social workers or case managers, and they can get some nursing stuff achieved, or having a phlebotomist go out with us. That's so awesome. They can get their labs done, and I can follow up with them about their plan for DTA in the morning, you know. So I'm really thinking about, when you're doing outreach, if there's a way that you can differentiate the roles so you can accomplish as much as possible, that's awesome. And, you know, don't forget about self-care. Well, we can talk about that another time.
This work is not for the faint of heart, and to everyone who took the time to tune in, we really admire the work that you do.
Absolutely.
So now that anyone has any questions for Patsy and James while they're on, please submit it in either the Q&A box or the chat box. We don't have any pending questions right now, but we will be on for the next few minutes looking for those. And you also can contact Patsy and James. Here are their email addresses if you want to jot them down. And we'll wait a minute and see if we get any questions for them to answer.
Sorry. All of your questions? No, there's no questions.
If you're wondering who made those poll questions, it was James.
It was me. Based on real experience.
I have one question that just came in from Roger, and he asks, can you expand on social media engagement?
Hey, Roger from Chicago, I think. So social media engagement, you know, I think that check in with what your policy is at your agency. Some agencies will allow for you to make a private Facebook group, you know, and you might be able to send out information about that. Some people, you know, for us, at our agency, we'll often print out flyers with things that, like, are, you know, just like, one of our counselor testers did, like, a whole series on Star Wars.
Yep.
And he used kind of like the active media in the community to make, you know, suggestions that people check in with their provider about getting tested for HIV and hepatitis C. So social media you can use it in a lot of different ways. At one of our partner agencies, they have permission to contact their clients through Facebook Messenger. And so they are able to do that. They have a policy where they can send messages around, like, can you call me at this number? Our agency, you know, we don't feel super comfortable with that because we've had experiences where our clients have sent messages that, you know, obviously weren't meant for that provider, or have said things that needed to be responded to in an urgent matter. But, you know, it's really something for you to think about with your team, and think about what kind of stuff you want to do. We have at Healthcare for the Homeless program, we do have a public Facebook page, and we do have a public Twitter page, and we put out information about, our development team puts out information about different opportunities to get involved. So sock drives, or immigration clinics, free immigration clinics, or health fairs that we have in the community, so we can get that message out to the community if they want to engage.
And I think the push-pull, Roger, is that like media is so instantaneous, but case management in very rare cases is ever emergency based. And I think a lot of that is about, you know, talking to patients about, you know, there are cases where it will be an emergency, but you want patients to know that it may take you a minute to get back to them, because you don't want them just sitting by if they text you at 12 at night or 3 in the morning, you don't want them waiting by their phone for a response, because it's not going to happen.
I think it's also just really important for you to set the expectations about communication with your clients while you start to work with them.
Yeah.
You know, letting them know if you do have access to social media, you know, whether or not your agency allows for you to contact them on that, and what's their comfort level. Do they want to be contacted on Facebook, or do they absolutely not want to be? You know, we have to figure out what our clients are comfortable with and how we can respect that boundary. So making sure you have that clear conversation up front about what people are comfortable with.
And Rogers had said, I want to see this flyer to you, Patsy, and then also how do you balance privacy and marketing or community, but maybe, you know, you guys had, it was during when you guys were speaking, so maybe you guys could come to that. But if you have any other comments.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, so our development team does a really great job at just marketing like information about events that are coming up, and they manage the Facebook account. So, you know, they will get back to people who request more information. But our frontline staff really, we're told that we should not be using social media, so we try not to. I mean, we don't use it.
And in terms of privacy and stuff, I mean, yeah, that's really challenging. I mean, even in person, you know, sort of, it's a separate webinar about sort of like boundaries. I mean, you want to engage people, but, you know, sort of like we work for our clients. So it's not a two-way street, it's a one-way street, but you don't want to be faceless. You want them to have a sense of your character, personality, style. You want to know a little bit about you, but you don't want to tell them too much. So that's a case-by-case scenario, and maybe a different webinar, but it's kind of a moving boundary.
And it's also, you know, while we're on the topic of social media, you know, really thinking about your own personal social media and how public it is. You know, our clients love to know about us as service providers. I have had several times in my time as a social worker where I've gotten friend requests on Facebook from patients.
All the time.
You know, it's an uncomfortable thing. You know, obviously I'm not going to accept that friendship, but I am going to have a follow-up conversation with the client to say why I didn't accept their friendship, so that they're not personally offended, or so that, you know, we can readdress that boundary. But, you know, thinking about what patients can see about you before they're friends with you. You know, do you want a picture of your apartment? Maybe not. Do you want to have your cell phone number on your Facebook? Do you want to have your personal email on your Facebook? Think about, you know, there's a way that you can check what your public settings are, and what your profile picture looks like, or what your cover photo is. Do you want a cover photo of your entire family? Like, you know, these are special things to consider, because sometimes our clients have great intentions and sometimes they don't, and so you just really have to think about your safety and not make assumptions about your safety.
Well, that's all we have for time. Thank you so much, Patsy and James. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Just so you guys know, we do have an upcoming webinar for September 18th at the same time, 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern. This will be on the intersection of housing and employment for clients with incarceration history. So more on that to come. And thank you for joining us today, and have a nice day.
Thank you.